With the second pick in the 2020 NFL Draft, the Washington Redskins select Chase Young, defensive end, Ohio State.
But you know as they say, hail to the Redskins. Let's roll, man. Let's go.
Got another super chat here from Miguel Reyes 17. Thank you for the super chat, Miguel Reyes 17. Greatly appreciate you. Miguel writes, Cam Sims still on the squad. He should consider tight end. You know what? That's the perfect segue, and I got a nice super chat from my man Double M Martin Matthews that we'll get to here in a second. I'm gonna use this time right now to transition right into the wide receiver discussion, because you talked about Cam Sims and whether he's still on the roster or not. Let's talk about not only Cam Sims but the other 12 wide receivers that are currently on the roster. So let's transition into this wide receiver group that I've broken down into 4 different categories. Those categories are camp bodies. These are the guys that don't stand a chance at making this football team. Even if a couple of injuries, we'll go ahead and knock on some wood in advance. But even if a couple of things happened that opened up some opportunities for them, they're still too far off the pace to even be in the discussion on this football team. Then you've got the outsiders. This group here, they're on the outside looking in of the roster. These are the guys that probably not going to make the football team. However, if, you know, I just talked about a couple of unforeseen circumstances entering into the equation, these are the guys that will probably benefit the most and have a chance to maybe ease their way in or sneak their way in to the roster. But right now, these are the guys that I think, because of the turnover and the new regime, these are the guys that are going to be hurt by the change in the coaching staff and upper management. Then you have the serious contenders. These are the guys that have a serious shot at making this football team. None of them are locks. All of them are competing for what is potentially going to be 1 or 2 spots. If the Redskins decide to go with 5 receivers, they're competing for 1 spot. If the Redskins decide to go with 6 receivers, then those guys are competing for 2 spots. And then you have your locks, and we all know who they are, and there are 4 of them. And so with those 4 locks, pretty much shapes and molds your wide receiver position, and then you start building from there. And so those are your 4 categories. Let's dig in. So just to give you a little bit of framework before we even get to the names of the guys on the roster, just to give you a quick overview of what Rivera and company have done at the wide receiver position. They haven't been bashful in the past at keeping 6 receivers. One of those guys is usually a core special teamer. In Carolina for years, they had Brinson, their receiver, the white guy, number 11, on their roster for years as a core special teamer. And so they would carry 6 receivers every single year. The only year, and it's coincidentally enough, 2019, they carried 5. And in 2015, the Super Bowl year, they carried 5. But all the years in between, from 2016 to 2018, so 3 consecutive years, they carried 6 wide receivers. But the caveat here, and the reason I said coincidentally enough, is that Scott Turner had a little bit more say-so in 2019. You know, his dad was there. Obviously, his dad was there in 2018 as well. But, they kept only 5 in 2019. Maybe that's a little bit of a look into the mind of a Scott Turner. Maybe 5 is all he's really looking to keep. But it wouldn't shock me if they kept 6. In my mind, it doesn't matter if it's 5 or 6. If it's 6, those last 2 guys have to be core special teamers. If it's 5, that last guy has to be a core special teamer. And of the 4 that I just mentioned, 1 or 2 of those guys are going to play specials. They've taken Terry fully off of specials, as they should have. Antonio Gandy-Golden probably going to start out playing some special teams. Maybe not a ton of them, but he's going to play a little bit. But Kelvin Harmon may be playing some specials. He played it last year. Generally, as a rookie, you don't have a choice. You got to jump in there and play some specials. So Gandy-Golden probably going to be going down and playing a little bit of special teams for the team. But in any event, let's dive in. So we start with the camp bodies. These are the guys they just don't stand a shot at making this football team. And I take it a step further. If the NFL decided that in an event to try to limit the amount of guys that are in a locker room, and you want to limit the exposure of so many players, you know, the rosters usually start out at 90 as you get into camp, then you trim it down. I could see the league saying, hey, let's get these rosters to 75 initially. Let's not come to camp with 90 guys. Let's come to camp with 75 bodies. If they were to do that, I think you'd see these 4 guys gone, or at least 2 or 3 of them gone right immediately off the bat. But these guys are Emanuel Hall, Johnathon Johnson, Jester Weah, and Jordan Veasy. Those are the 4 guys that right then and there, they just don't stand a shot. And, you know, Emanuel Hall is a guy that has elite speed. You saw it at Missouri. He played with Drew Lock, was his go-to receiver when he wanted to push the football vertically. But, you know, none of these guys stand a shot at making this football team. I just don't see it happening. So right there, you trim the receiver room down to 9. All right, so with these final 9, you have 3 categories. The next group we encounter are the outsiders. And I know I'm going to catch a little bit of flack here for the, you know, one of the names in this group, but this is just how I see it. You got Darvin Kidsy Jr., who I really feel like was very close to making the football team last year. I think it really came down to him and Steven Sims Jr. last year. And I remember Kidsy had a couple of drops early on in the preseason. I really think that hurt him, but I think it really came down to Steven Sims Jr. Ability on specials. He just was too dynamic to leave off the roster, and Darvin Kidsy was the guy that was the odd man out. Now, that was with the last regime. That was with Jay Gruden, who had been exposed to Kidsy for 2 straight years. That was with a regime that was comfortable with Kidsy and felt like this guy, all he needed was an opportunity. This new group could give 2 shits about Darvin Kidsy and what he's done in the preseason the last 2 years. I just don't see Kidsy having a real shot at making this football team, even though he's an outsider. I don't think he's going to make the football team. Then you have Cam Sims in this group. So those are the 2 receivers in the outsiders group. Cam Sims is another guy that I think would have benefited from Jay Gruden being around. That would have benefited from Bruce Allen and company being around. Maybe even Kevin O'Connell still being around. The guys that were exposed to him these past couple of seasons and feel like this guy has something to offer. Now he's just another dude out there. He's a jag right now. He's just another guy at the receiver position. And now remember, there was once a role for Cam Sims because we didn't have any big targets. All of our guys were 6 feet, 6'1", and 5'11", 5'8", 5'9". Like, we had smaller receivers. We had Crowder, and we had Quinn, and we had, you know, Troy Richardson, or Paul Richardson Jr. and or Senior. And now that's not a problem with Kelvin Harmon at 6'2". And Antonio Gandy-Golden, the Gandy Man, at 6'4", size is no longer a problem. And so now a guy like Cam Sims is on the outside looking in. There is no way for him to really carve out a niche for himself. The niche was, hey, I'm bigger than anybody you got. Give me a shot. Now you got big guys on the roster, and because of that, and because there is no Jay Gruden and someone that has seen him for the last 2 years that thinks, hey, this guy's got talent, he just needs an opportunity. I think Cam Sims is now officially an outsider. As you get to now the serious contenders, the first guy on the list is Isaiah Wright. And I almost felt a little dirty putting him ahead of Cam Sims on this list. But when you listen to the Redskins special teams coordinator, Nate Kazard, talk, he actually mentions Isaiah Wright by name. Generally speaking, when the special teams coordinator, who hasn't even met you yet, but has only watched film on you, is already referencing you by name, that's a really good thing, because when we start talking about the back end of the roster, which that 5th or 6th spot on the wide receiver group is back into the roster, you start talking about core special teamers. You start talking about the tight ends coach potentially being the deciding vote in that locker room or in that conference room or in that meeting room to decide if a guy's going to make the football team or not. When they are at a stalemate in that room when they're talking about, hey, who's got to go, who needs to stay. And let's say you got 4 coaches for this guy to stay, 4 coaches for that same player to go, and there's a divide. They go to the special teams coach. Hey, what do you think? And if he says, hey, look, man, this guy is an essential on special teams. He's the best, one of the best ones we got. I'd love to have him. He'd make our special teams unit one of the better ones in the league. Well, there you go. There's the deciding vote. There may be the last, thing that the coach needs to hear to ultimately decide, him and the GM decide, okay, this is the guy we need to keep. And so Isaiah Wright comes in, and I remember listening to Nate Kazer's conference call, his Zoom call, and he said, Terry McLaurin, it hurt last year when Terry was snatched from him very early in the season. He said pretty much the Philadelphia game when Terry came out of the gate, and spanked the Eagles for 88 out the gate. He's like, I pretty much knew right away, all right, I won't be seeing him on special teams anymore. He said it hurt. It's like it was like getting a Christmas gift and then having somebody come back and say, all right, man, I'm going to need that gift back. We're going through some tough times. I'm going to have to run this to the pawn shop. I'm sorry. He says Isaiah Wright kind of gives him that Terry McLaurin vibe in terms of this guy's a core special teamer. Remember, we were talking when Terry was first drafted, we were talking about Terry McLaurin and how much of an impact he was going to have on special teams. Like, that's the kind of stuff we were leaning on because we didn't know what we had in Terry as a receiver. Isaiah Wright is a guy that they look at as a potential core special teamer. And because of that, plus he also gives you some of those gadget guy vibes because he's a guy that has versatility, could do some things in the backfield, can run your jet sweeps. He's not really a true wide receiver, very raw in that regard, but kind of gives you those J.D. McKissick, Antonio Gibson type vibes. So I could see him sticking onto this roster for that particular purpose as well. So he's a serious contender. I initially, if you remember, I initially dismissed him. Remember when I was breaking down some of the UDFAs or the PFAs that the Redskins signed immediately after the draft, I couldn't even remember Isaiah Wright's name. I said, oh yeah, that guy for Temple, we're not keeping him. Don't let anybody fool you or talk you to death about him. He's not making a football team. Well, I've walked that back, and it all really started with Nate Kazer pretty much speaking up Isaiah Wright. So the next serious contender is a guy that I don't think is going to make this football team, and he didn't do himself any favors in the offseason, but he hasn't been released yet, and that's Cody Latimer. Now, I never thought Cody Latimer was going to make this football team. Let me say that. Remember when we signed him, we were doing a live video when we signed him. You guys brought him up, and I told you, and I didn't even know we had signed him when you brought him up. Someone just said, hey, what do you think of Cody Latimer? And I pretty much said, oh, he's a journeyman wide receiver. He's more known for his special teams than his actual receiving prowess at this point of his career. But he has carved out a niche for himself as a core special teamer in this league. Has some talent, but really he's a one-trick pony. Hasn't, proven to be anything more than a guy that can run. Hasn't proven to be a guy that can do the technical things at the receiver position. And so he's more so a wide receiver that is a core special teamer at this point of his career. And so I dismissed him. And, we keep talking about the veteran. Redskins need a veteran. Well, that's why they signed Cody Latimer. He was supposed to fill that veteran void. If they were going to keep a veteran on this football team, he was supposed to be it. Guy that's been on multiple teams, at least 3 to this point of his career, been around the block a couple of times, has seen a lot, can give some of these young guys a little bit of tutelage as to what to expect at the NFL level. And also, I just mentioned that the guy that gets that 5th or 6th spot, if they decide to go with 6 receivers, I'm thinking they're going 5 right now, he's going to have to be a core special teamer. Gotta be. Not optional. This guy's got to be one hell of a special teams player. Well, Isaiah Wright is that. So is Cody Latimer. So those guys are serious contenders based off of that notion that these guys give you a little something on specials. And then Trey Quinn, obviously, is the incumbent. If you're going to beat out Trey Quinn, you're going to have to take this position away from him. Until someone takes it from him, it's his spot to lose. All right, Trey Quinn is the leader in the doghouse. He was on his football team last year. A ton of film on him. I know they feel like they can do some things with him, and he's got a ton to prove, you know. Last year wasn't his best year, and so if Trey Quinn wants to make this football team, he's going to have to take it up a notch. Last year wasn't good enough, and, the year before that, was injury-plagued, and I don't think that was good enough either. You saw flashes 2 years ago. I didn't see as many flashes last year, and maybe that was because of the younger staff. Maybe it's because of Jay Gruden wasn't here to save him, and, that was Jay's guy. Remember, he was Mr. Irrelevant. Jay was banging the table for Trey Quinn, a round or two earlier, and he happened to still be there at the final pick of the draft, and so Jay ultimately got his guy. So Trey Quinn was always going to be safe as long as Jay Gruden was here. Well, Jay's no longer here. That means Trey Quinn potentially is on the chopping block. So he's another guy that's a serious contender right now, but it wouldn't shock me if someone was able to leapfrog Trey Quinn in terms of making this football team. And then you get to the stone cold lead pipe locks. These guys, you can go ahead and write their name in marker. They're making this football team. And so there's 4 of these guys. You know the names, but we'll go through them one by one, starting with the Rook, Antonio Gandy-Golden, the Gandhi Man. You down with AGG? Yeah, you know me. Who's down with AGG? Every last Redskin fan out there. Everybody. All right, so AGG is something that we've lacked at the receiver position for quite some time, and that's size. Just pure, unadulterated size. We haven't had a guy that we could just throw the football up to. It's the reason that Redskins fans get excited for guys like Marco Mitchell. It's the reason that as Redskins fans, we got excited about the Michigan State wide receiver that we drafted back in 2008, Devin Thomas. All right, because he had a little bit of size on him and strength. And so it's the reason we always get excited when we see a bigger wide receiver, even if he doesn't have the most talent in the world. Why? Because we haven't had. It's the reason why so many of you Redskins fans have attached yourself to Cam Sims. Can't let him go. Think he's going to be the next best thing since sliced bread. Why? Because we haven't had size in forever. Okay, and when you look around the league and all these teams have big body receivers that are bodying up DBs, you want your own version of that. And we haven't had it. So now we do in Antonio Gandy-Golden. And so I think he makes a guy like Cam Sims, expendable, dispensable. You don't have to have him. And I'm looking forward to seeing what AGG is able to provide for this offense. Not just in the red zone, but also on third downs with just his sheer physical presence. And also I talked about being able to run and block in the run game. He's a physical specimen. All right. Now, again, I get it. He was at Liberty, wasn't playing against the best competition. You're going to hear that a ton. But look, he's still 6'4", 223. All right. It's not like this guy's chopped liver. He's not minced meat. He's a big dude. And so he's probably on most occasions going to be much bigger than the guy across from him. So he's going to be a physical presence in the run game as well. Then there's Steven Sims Jr. We all loved what he provided for this team on a special teams note, and also at the end of the season providing an offensive spark. We've seen the potential. We see the flickering flame. We think that thing is going to just blow up into a full raging fire in 2020. We see the potential for him to put up massive numbers as a slot machine. We also think that this is a guy that can still contribute on specials. There's a lot to love about Steven Sims Jr., and he is definitely a guy that we feel like this offense is going to grow with moving forward. And so he is a 100% unequivocal lock on this football team. Same could be said for Kelvin Harmon. He's a guy last year that we saw flashes from as well. I don't know if the upside is as great with him as it is with the next guy we're going to talk about, or the guy we just previously talked about with Steven Sims. And it's maybe the reason the Redskins went after Antonio Gandy-Golden, because they don't think the upside on Kelvin Harmon is as high. It's his job to prove everyone wrong. If I'm Kelvin Harmon, I'm just assuming nobody believes in me. That includes this coaching staff. If you did believe in me, you wouldn't have gotten a guy that kind of looks like me but's bigger than me and has a similar skill set to me. All right. You wouldn't have went out and got a guy like that. And so he's got to take on the challenge of saying, you want AGG to take my spot? Well, he's going to have to do it over my dead body because I'm about to go out here and put up some numbers and put in some work. And by doing that, he can either hold off the inevitable or he can say, you can't move me. You can't get rid of me. I'm a part of this football team and I'm a guy you got to have in the lineup. And that doesn't mean that, AGG can't still get his reps and his touches. That just means, hey, we got to also make sure Kelvin Harmon gets his as well. So there's enough to go around for everyone. If Kelvin Harmon wants some, he's going to have to earn it. But he's going to get that chance because he's going to be on this football team. And then obviously the main attraction, the star of this show, Terry McLaurin, is your number one wide receiver. He's a lock. The things he was able to do last year just blew us away. Some of you guys may have thought that that was possible, that he was going to jump in right away and do the things that he did. Some of you may have thought that he was nothing more than a special teams guy, a little disappointed about spending a third-round pick on him. I was somewhere in the middle. I was initially disappointed. You guys watched the draft with me last year, and I was disappointed about Terry McLaurin in the third round. And, I wanted offensive linemen, which is funny enough that I was complaining about us not taking an offensive lineman and instead taking Terry McLaurin, and he turned out to be the best thing that has ever happened to us in a third-round pick in quite some time. And we've had some good third-rounders over the years, but nothing quite like this. Terry from day one, first game of the season, jumped off the screen and said, I'm that dude. In case you were wondering, and some of you didn't know because you never had a chance to see it in the preseason. And so, at Ohio State, he was an afterthought. There were 2 or 3 other guys that had more, receptions and yards, but nobody had a bigger average per catch than Terry McLaurin at Ohio State last year. And he had a bunch of touchdowns, and we saw all of that translate to the NFL level. So we feel like we legitimately have a number one wide receiver in this league. And I feel really good about number 17 moving forward. So those are your 13 wide receivers. I honestly feel like you're looking at a situation where it's 9 guys for 5 or 6 spots. That's essentially what I've trimmed this down to. Darvin Kidsy, Cam Sims, Isaiah Wright, Cody Latimer, Trey Quinn, Gandy-Golden, Sims Jr., Harmon, and McLaurin. Those 9 guys competing for 5 or 6 spots. We know 4 of them are locked. So essentially what I'm telling you is for 1 or 2 spots, you've got 5 guys competing for 1 or 2 spots. And if you want to narrow it down, as I did, to the serious contenders, you're probably looking at more like 3 guys for 1 or 2 spots. So that is the wide receiver position in a nutshell. And, to go back to the super chat from Miguel Reyes, I don't think Cam Sims views himself as a tight end. It's easy to say, hey, this guy should just make the conversion over to tight end. Well, you have to have a tight end mentality. You've got to want to make that switch. I don't know if anybody's approached Cam Sims in making that switch, but if you don't see a path for you to make this football team at wide receiver, but there is one at tight end, obviously, then he should have made that switch himself. But he probably has confidence in his abilities, thinks that he's good enough. My thing has always been with Cam Sims. He wasn't good enough at Alabama. So why was I going to think that he was going to be good enough here? And for whatever reason, I don't want to hear the excuses at Alabama. I just know he wasn't. He wasn't. And it's not like Alabama had world beaters at receiver when he was there. Now, if he was in that group that left Alabama last year, okay, I could understand that. Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs the third and all of the guys, Devontae Smith and the other wide receiver, Waddle. He wasn't going to do anything with those guys. They're studs. Those are NFL studs. But when he was there weren't those NFL studs. He could have made an impact. He just didn't for whatever reason. So I was never looking forward to Cam Sims. It was nice, but, I don't know. A lot of you guys latched on to him for whatever reason. I think it was really just because he was tall, and we haven't had one of those guys in quite some time. But in any event, thank you for the super chat, Miguel Reyes.
Louie.